Thank you so much for this And if I could ask the panelists to come up and have a seat as well. I'm sure there are many questions and comments on Professor Halbertal's lecture. Please hold on to those, because as you probably have gathered by now, being a Paideia alumni carries many privileges. One of them is to be the first to comment upon this lecture. And I will give the word first to David Stoleru, here in the middle, who is the founding director of the BAIT project. He is an architect, he's also an educator, and he's a graduate from the Mandel Leadership Institute in Jerusalem. Please, David.
Thank you very much. First of all, to speak after Moshe is really a hard task and a real honor. So thank you for this first presentation. And I'd like to use those few minutes to try to speak about not only the issue of home, of house, but actually what is the vision in Jewish tradition, in Jewish culture. What is actually the idea of the concept of a home in a tradition that actually begins with so many years in desert, nomadic, as a nomadic people. What it means to, at some point, to arrive to a place and to imagine what it means to settle down. And whether the tradition actually encouraged an idea of being nomadic, or is it encouraging the idea of being sedentary, to settle, or maybe something in the middle, to be a nomadic sedentary, a sedentary nomad, what it means. I try to begin with something that we have just done today, which is to put a simple artifact called in Jewish tradition the mezuzah, which Ute have just put it here in this magnificent house. The name of this small artifact that actually is changing, modifying the situation of a generic house into a Jewish place, mezuzah, come from a very interesting word, very interesting root. Zayin, Vav, Zayin, Zuz, which actually comes from the same root as to move, or maybe even Zuz as come out of here in Hebrew today. So we are putting an artifact in the house, but actually it's called movement, coming out. And not only that, that in the bracha that Ute recited, that we say, was actually built of two words, likva, mezuzah. To translate likva, to fix, yeah, to place, to fix in a very strong way the movement, the mezuzah. Something that seems actually quite antinomic, the contrary one to each other. What it means in terms of looking on our tradition through those two words and putting those two words in the same sentence. There is another text, very interesting. In the Mishnah, I don't remember exactly where, maybe Moshe can help me, that says, En lo le'adam, ela arba amotav. The human being, the person, has no place but the four amot, the cubits, yeah, about 2 square meters. And the explanation, what are those 2 square meters? The places where it's going to be buried. So it means that you don't own any place but the one that comes after your life, when movement is over. This gives us another glimpse on what may be the idea of our tradition, thinking about it. So is a home a reality? Is a home a symbol? Is a home a concept in our tradition? What is sure, that is following the ideas developed by Moshe, it's a place of intimacy. And how we can understand it? By the Hebrew language. In the Hebrew language, we have the idea of using the word home for many other places. Beit Sefer is the school, the house of the book. Beit Knesset is the synagogue, the house of the community. Beit Cholim, the house of the sick people, Beit Yitomim, and places of intimacy are described in Hebrew language as linked to the idea of home, of something that is intimately linked to us. There is also another example, very interesting, coming from a scholar from medieval time, Ameiri, from Catalonia, from next to Barcelona, where I live. And actually, he gave a name to his main book. It's called Beit HaBchira, which is one of the names of the Beit HaMikdash, of the temple in Jerusalem, the chosen place, the chosen house. But this book is actually bringing together different interpretations of texts. So maybe what he wanted to say by naming his book this way is to actually name a book the place of the choice. The place where you can choose, Beit HaBchira, the house of the choice, when you can choose among different explanations, among different interpretations, and pick yours. Which actually means that the home, the house, the place of the choice is the text. And last, just recall that actually in Hebrew, we have a letter, the bet, which has exactly the same structure, the same name as the bait, the house. What it means? First of all, it has a very interesting architecture, because the letter bet is made out of a roof, of a wall, and a large basis. And more important, the window that is overlooking forward. But also it's the second letter of the alphabet. Aleph, bet, like alpha, beta. But in Hebrew it's also used as a number 2, which means that the house is the place where me and the other have an encounter, which is the same idea of intimacy. The house, in Jewish tradition, is the place where there is the encounter, the place where there is the dialogue, and the place where there is the intimacy. Thank you.
Thank you so much, David. I was especially interested in your comment about the likboa mezuzah, the fixing of the movement. We all know the Swedish writer August Strindberg. What you may not know about him is that he also wrote 2 books on Hebrew linguistics. I wouldn't recommend these if you want to learn Hebrew. His experience in studying Hebrew was clearly quite limited, but one of the etymologies that he had was that the Hebrew verb bo was clearly related to the Swedish verb bo, to recite. So clearly he had the idea of the movement of coming and the reciting in the house was somehow related. Maybe he came upon that by chance rather than by profound Hebrew studies, but still. Once again, hold on to your questions and comments, and we turn the word over to Natalie Lantz, who is a PhD student in Hebrew Bible at the Uppsala University. She's doing a comparative study of the Dead Sea Scrolls and Paideia literature, and she also works as a translator of modern Hebrew fiction.
Thank you, Lena. Is it on? Hear me? First of all, thank you, Paideia faculty, for letting me take on the burden of appearance in this homely environment. And I'd like to take a moment to reflect on a Tanakhic perspective of the house of God, Beit HaMikdash. Because there was a time when God had to migrate. Throughout history, mankind has erected splendid structures in order to provide a dwelling place, a physical home for their deities. And even though the archaeological evidence is scarce of the Solomonic temple in Jerusalem, its conceptual significance sends ripples into the heart of contemporary Judaism. So therefore, I'd like to take a moment to reflect upon the theological implications that rise when the physical sanctuary mediating God's presence, Kavod Adonai, in later Judaism and later Rabbinic Judaism called Shekhinah, Mishkan, the presence of God as indwelling. When it is demolished and God is exiled into a condition of impermanence and dislocation. So in the 6th century before Common Era, the kingdom of Judah suffered a catastrophe of unprecedented scale. Within just a few years, the theological system of Judah collapsed by the hands of the Babylonians. The loss of land, the chosen people status, city, temple, and monarchy was a trauma that accompanied many of the exiles into Babylonia. So the temple, the very epicenter for worship, is no longer available for the exiles. And it is not far-fetched to assume that their direct contact with God was seriously damaged. This disaster might have been the end of Israel as a religious community had it not been for a few theologians that managed to project meaning, theological meaning, into the events. The priest and prophet Ezekiel dealt with the aftermath of the destruction of the temple. Why did God allow for the temple in Jerusalem to fall and be destroyed? Ezekiel solved this problem by arguing that the kavod Adonai, I'd like to translate it to the presence of God, can be present anywhere, even in Babylonia and without a physical sanctuary. Prior to the disaster, God was fixed to a certain place in a certain land, but the prophet Ezekiel described how he's urged by God to inform the exiles the following. Though I have removed them far among the nations, and though I have scattered them among the countries, yet I have become to them a mikdash ma'at, a sanctuary in small measures in the lands into which they have gone. So the mikdash ma'at, a sanctuary in small measure, we should not assume that the reduction of the physical dimension of the mikdash here is evidencing a decrease of importance. On the contrary, a miniaturization of an object or a concept can in fact increase the dimension of its significance. He spoke of a very tiny object, the mezuzah, of great importance. So in the eras to come, when many Jews view the diaspora, if we even can call it that anymore, as our natural living space, the idea of the presence of God dwelling in the midst of the community lays the foundation for the growth of the synagogue and the democratization of religion. Ezekiel still expected a future ideal temple to be built in Jerusalem, but his illustration of God's presence without the temple, paved the way for a metaphorical understanding of the temple. And even here, in Paideia's new shining building in Stockholm, we can appreciate that it is his metaphors and the concepts, and, to speak with you, Barbara, the memories that will be the building blocks of resilience and creativity, even when this building is no longer.
Thank you, Natalie. And I think that we will carry that image of the displaced presence that's present everywhere in our discussion afterwards. Maybe that could be seen as a metaphor for Paideia as well, that once you've experienced the creative home and present here, you can sort of carry that with you wherever you go. And this is what the final panelist has done, Oriol Poveda, who is now a PhD student in sociology of religion in Uppsala University, working on a thesis on Jewish trans persons with Orthodox background.
And Lena is my co-supervisor. It's a pleasure to be here.
Come here.
Oh, you hear me?
Yeah.
Closer? Okay. So, yes, thank you for this opportunity to address you. I think it's a big honor, and it's thrilling and also weighs on my shoulders to come after, but also David and Natalie. But let's say we're at home, so we can relax a little bit. I don't feel I have to deliver or perform.
We can't hear. You must.
You can hear me. Okay. I'll try to speak louder, more assertive.
And very close.
Very close. We need to get better microphones. Okay. So I like to quickly just share my thesis, if you want, or an idea that I thought would be appropriate to this forum. To a certain extent, I think you could read Jewish history as a movement between tents and homes or houses. And I think this is important because this has been some sort of a historic continuum. And each of these terms, the tent and the home, I think they're very, very ambivalent. And by choosing one, we're not necessarily excluding the other, but we're making some choices about this Jewish history, about this movement between or from tents to homes. I think David referred to it a little bit about this nomadic past. So if we open up a little bit this ambivalence about the tent, I think many of you, maybe the first thing that comes to mind is the tent of Abraham, which was famous for being open to strangers. Other tents, not exactly tents, booths, tabernacles, used in Sukkot, Zman Simchatenu, the season of rejoicing. These are some of the positive associations, I would say, with the word tent. Of course, there are also darker associations. The camps for dispersed persons in the aftermath of the Holocaust, the many Jewish refugees through history, the refugees which we're living with now. So there is this ambivalence to the concept of tent. And I would resume, if you want to try to sum up this ambivalence in terms of this precariousness, this vulnerability that you have with a tent. At the same time, that there is also very deep intimacy. I know that you talk about intimacy in the context of the home, but I think the openness of the tent gives us also an intimacy with nature, with God. This very precariousness also that puts us in touch with a very existential layer of what it means to be human. And I think the story about Elijah was very much about losing that intimacy, but putting barriers. So if we move then to the home, to the house, I think you did a very good job in explaining like the brighter side of home and what I think more intuitively all of us associate with the idea of home. Although Moshe has spoken also of a home as an inward castle, or I was thinking, the word was coming up to my mind, was this golden cage. You see all these millionaires living in their golden cages. And you don't know who is trapped, who is a prisoner, if they are prisoners of the ones who've been left outside of their lifestyles. But I think this suggests these ideas of home and homeland, which I'm very glad that Moshe brought this concept to. There's these notions of entitlement, also of nationalism, if you want, going Ori, and as many of you here in the room probably follow Israeli politics, it's no coincidence that there's parties called Israel Beteinu or Beit Yehudi, for instance. Also home as an intellectual category, as a comfort zone. In academia, you have people who say, oh, I'm not at home in this discipline. I'm out of my comfort zone. So I think there is also this danger, if you want, of home, of inviting some certain narrow-mindedness sometimes, where people just find what is comfortable, what is homey, familiar, close to them. So I just wanted to conclude that my thesis is that Jewish history could be told as a story of tents and homes, is somehow related to what Yuri Seleskin explained in this book, The Jewish Century, where he has a thesis that the Jewish people and other minorities like Armenians and so on, he calls them Mercurians, in contrast to the majority society who are Apollonians. And the Mercurians are these service nomads, entrepreneurial, who go between places, who kind of make the connections, while the Apollonians are these majority societies who are much more settled and established. They're the food producers. And his thesis is that the Jewish century is called the Jewish century because all of us have become Jews, in the sense that all of us have become much more Mercurian, much more cosmopolitan, globalized, fluid in a way. When Paideia had the 10th anniversary conference, one of the keynotes was Zygmunt Bauman. And he also spoke of something similar. He spoke of the diasporization of Europe, like the end of these national majorities, of this sense of an ethnic group being the natural majority in a particular country, and how there is growing diasporization all across the continent through multiculturalism, migration flows, and so on. So I think choosing the name Beit or home, in a way, is a polemics against both Seleskin and Bauman, by choosing more of an Apollonian term, if you want. And I embrace this idea of a home as Judaism being, if you want, one of the founding cultures of Europe, not an import or something exogenous. Embracing this idea of a Jewish Swedishness, but at the same time, I think we have to be on guard, as I was saying before, on the ambivalences of home and what we are missing or leaving out by not calling it a tent. So I don't have a final answer. I just hope these thoughts can be provoking for a conversation. Thank you.
Thank you, Oriol. So we carry with us the image of the tent of hospitality and the tent of dispersion and despair into the following conversation. And now we open the floor for questions and comments from the audience.
Moshe, what happens to your concept of home when home had been somebody else's home? When you sit in their chairs in a room and you can still hear the conversations, you sleep in their beds in their room, which is still full of their dreams. What happens to home then?
If you are a mensch, you would never feel at home in such a place.
If you have no choice.
What?
If you have no choice.
The ghosts of those whom were expelled will follow you, and you would never be at home unless you came to terms with that fact. Now, there is very complex ways of coming to terms with it. If you're not a mensch, you're going to engage in order to create a false sense of home. You'll be engaged in denial, distortion. You'll be engaging in a double crime, which is dispossessing and denying. Yeah, it's And then I think that the challenge of those realities, I mean, political and human, will be to ask, can we have a universe where there isn't a zero-sum game? Home. So some of us will have to be homeless, always, depends who. And there is kind of the struggle of, and that there is that sense that there's enough there for everybody to be at home and have a home. And it has to do with, with realities also of a nation seeking a home, and seeking home for very good reasons, has to remember that when becoming a majority, the last thing you want to do is putting that minority on guard. Now, we Jews know how to be a minority. Unfortunately, we have to learn how to be a majority. It's still a task, an ongoing task, complex task. Yes. This is such a deep, complex question, a deep and complex question. And if you talked about the sacred and the home, we live, if you look at homes of the sacred, one of the tragic histories of religion is the overlapping maps of the sacred. That's Jerusalem. Jerusalem is the place where you have overlapping maps of the sacred. Well, someone told me, a philosopher and a friend of mine, gave the best definition of Jerusalem. He says it's the most international city in the world and the least cosmopolitan. But here we come to another problem, the history of religion. Right? You go to Spain or you go to other places, Jerusalem, other places where the new religions, in order to anchor themselves, have to build their own sacred places on top of the prior ones. So there is both nationally, personally, religiously, all this living in another home, another one's home. This is a whole very profound, complex human challenge.
So can we imagine a home, a bayit, which is not like a game of musical chairs where the music stops and there's always one chair short? Further questions and comments?
Thank you. Quite enlightening. I would like to make a remark plus question regarding the idea of home. There's a recent Israeli song which is sung quite often. I don't remember the music, and in any case you don't want to, believe me, you don't want to listen to it. But anyway, it says something like, home is where, if you have to come back, they'll take you in. This is home.
That's a line by Robert Frost.
Yes, but this is also a very modern Israeli hit. But thank you for the thanks.
Just the sense
okay.
of home, the prior home of that line.
I'm amazed, or at least interested, with the question of expanding or not of the idea of home to the national level and the political level. 70 years now to the Balfour Declaration this year. We'll have to tackle it somehow, but it does not speak of a national state or simply a state. It says national home. And the Jewish leadership, the Zionist movement, took it, accepted it. Question is why? Why home? Why not state? Is it not better, on the other hand? I know of only one country that actually calls itself home. There's an old book by a German philosopher, Renier his name is. He wrote a book called The English, Are They Sane? Or Are They Normal? And the motto reads like that. The French, they live in France. The Romans live in Rome. The Germans live in Germany, but the English live at home. Now, why don't we? Why don't we? I think that the UK is the only country that has a Home Office, not the Ministry of the Interior, Home Guard, Home Fleet, and so on and so forth. So they somehow, because they look at their country, I think so, with a tongue in cheek, they call it home. We take it so seriously, so it's Medinat Israel, very heavy and quite compulsory. So I would like to have your thoughts on that. The difference between the terms state, country, home, and what is more important. Thank you.
I think part of the impulse and the attractiveness of Zionism, this idea of Beit Leumi, is for Jews to seek a place that they don't have to be alert all the time, socially, etc. They can be who they are, whatever they are. And I must say, apropos sad reflections on the cosmopolitan Bauman fantasy, I am told many times when I'm in France to take off my kippah. Better today. In a way, I'm told that it's easier to walk with a kippah in Morocco than in France today. Because the king enforces those rules. So there was an urge among Jews for bite. Which I don't take it lightly. We take it now for granted, maybe. It's became a luxury. But it's not. And you said a place where you have to be taken. Yes, the Lord returned. You know, we still, I'm the generation of my parents' generation. My father was a Polish Jew who kind of knocked at different doors, trapped in Europe, that his family was destroyed. It's a very important, for me, Beit Leumi is more important than the concept of Medinat Israel, Medina state. That idea which enables flourishing, which poses now challenges in turn, of not to betray the sense of other people's home. And you made a very beautiful remark that the radical right in Israel calls its name by this, by that. I just want to remind you that the first radical movement called itself Moledet Homeland. Yes, that's a challenge. But one thing, and I'm now talking about as an Israeli, as a Zionist, we don't have to idealize homelessness in order to allow home for others. That's also a perverse way of seeing the world as a zero-sum game. So, and then all the tensions. You know, all human interesting projects are self-defeating to a certain degree. That's true of families, homes, and other things. And they're full of internal contradictions. And some of them have to do with the provinciality of home, right? The kitsch, the stickiness. You know, you fly a lal, how they call it? They have a term, להרגיש כמו בבית. To feel like at home, which means actually that the space between you and the next person actually gets shorter. Or לטוס עם השיכון, you know, to fly with the neighborhood. Yes, there is all those aspects, all those paradoxes. And I would say you have to be on guard, not to fall on all the traps in lowering the threshold of alertness. Home needs maintenance, the maintenance work. Yes, but the question again is deep. Bait Leumi is a powerful category. Powerful category. And I would say something else, I think. You can have that sense of security, of not being guarded, when you have a home somewhere. Because it's easy to talk the language of diaspora and exile, and being at the margins and being this and being that, as if my grandfather in the state was a social critic or so. Living between communities, making points as the outsider. Usually this is a good thing when you have tenure and a passport of a strong state. Say a good American university. So I think one of the powers of having a home is the capacity to move in the world without a home. And that's a difference between being a visitor and being a refugee. It's a very powerful thing. Home allows you to be a visitor. Without home, being a cosmopolitan means being a refugee. So they're great both virtues and dangers in the deep human notion of home, which actually, that's a sign that it's a deep category. If it didn't have dangers, it means it's a shallow category. Like all human deep problems. Yes, so the Balfour Declaration was stated as Bait Leumi in order to avoid the claim of a state and sovereignty. It has its own history, right? They didn't want to declare a state. But they may be out of their modesty, out of their political modesty, they actually struck a deeper chord on what does it mean, that project? What does it mean? Yes.
Thank you. So, in these times of mass migration and refugees and exile, how do we create a national home away from home when becoming provincial? I would like to invite the next question to be placed by a person below the age of 30.
That's ages.
Hi, thank you. Yes, I'm 23, so I made the cut. This question actually, or this remark, has to do with that. Everyone now uses the internet, of course. It's integral in our lives. But on the internet, we have wording that is similar. We have the homepage. We have on Facebook the wall. Right? We have passwords so to protect ourselves and to be intimate. And for people my age and younger, specifically younger, they sort of are on the internet as a home, as a new home. And so I'm just throwing this out for you, Professor Halbertal, and everyone else. I'm just curious to hear your remarks about the internet as a new home, and maybe as a new home for Jews. I thought a lot about that too, but yeah.
How about if we pass that question first to our Paideia alumni panelists?
I think it's of course very interesting.
We don't hear you.
Okay. I think it's indeed very interesting to look at the vocabulary that is used for the internet, because it always shows very clearly what is not only the concept, but what images we want to put in those concepts. I don't know what about the Jews specifically, but what I feel is that internet has become, for many, many people, specifically young people, the place and the activity where they spend actually more time than sleeping. It means that if the home is so important for a human being because it's the place where you spend a third of your life and a third of your day, and actually internet is becoming for many people this place, replacing that place and that activity. Sleeping less and being more active in the internet. What it means in terms of the sensation of not needing to be on guard, which is the basis of what was spoken, is actually not a debate, because I feel that on the internet you don't really feel that you can lower the guard. It's a place where you want to show something that is really an appearance. You are not trying to show on the internet your real self. You're actually sometimes even making up another self, just to put it in the internet. So that's, psychologically speaking, that brings to very, very deep debates. But I think that there is, of course, the idea of replacing the real house, or the physical house, into something that allows another self to rise up.
Oriol.
Yeah, I just want to say something very, very quickly. In relation to how Moshe has described home as a place where you can be yourself, where you can stop like doing this front stage performance. I'm very worried around these conversations on the internet when people hear about all these surveillance programs, and then often you hear, that's fine, I have nothing to hide. Really? I mean, once we come into this way of thinking in which the internet is home, it dissolves the category of home, I would say. Because it's this thinking that there is no more boundary between the private and the public. Everything becomes a big soup. So actually, I take issue with calling the internet home, and I think it's very dangerous to come into this way of thinking that we have nothing to hide, and then therefore we prefer security to freedom, or we prefer to being surveilled because we think we have nothing to hide. That would be my critical remark.
Well, I think that also we tend to think that conceptual structures is more tangible than actual physical structures. This summer I partook in an archaeological excavation of a 5th century synagogue in Hukok in the Galilee. And being outside in the nature, under the sun, when the Khamsin came and the storms and the winds, you really understand also the importance of having respect for walls. And privacy. And so therefore I think that it could be a danger if we only think of those conceptual islands that we create for ourselves as the actual home that we have. Home might be much more basic than that.
It's great. I mean, it's very hard to add.
Okay, we'll move on.
Yes.
We will move on.
I
So,
was thinking that's the only, what will be a mezuzah there?
yes. So a homepage doesn't necessarily give shelter from the Hamsin. I would like the next question to be posed by a lady.
The story about building a guardhouse, preventing one from hearing Eliyahu Hanavi, is beautiful, but seems like it was told specifically to a time when the people in the neighborhood were all the same ethnicity, religion, background, citizenship, something. They were all similar. But today in Europe, when some of us in small communities we have to build the guardhouse. We're told that we have to build the guardhouse because of Inyan HaBitachon, that I feel the minute that term gets said, I have to stand aside because I'm not an expert in security, but I do know that it prevents us from hearing, not just the poor, not just Eliyahu Hanavi, but also Dafka other Jews who are somewhere out there but can't get through. And that puts me on guard all the time in my own little Jewish house. So I'm wondering if you may have some helpful comments on that.
Yeah. No, because when I came in, right, and there are the guards being on guard, then you have a double door. It's like an entry to a prison. That means we're still not at home. That we get, to a certain degree, we have to be on guard. You know, Baruch Hashem, it's fine. I mean, let's not be too finicky and dramatic about it. But yes, I thought about entry threshold, house threshold build, and whether, and then you have to calculate again. I have to be very sensitive. You have to calculate the risks you want to assume in order to have windows and allow access. It's always, there's always some kind of calculation, not God forbid to endanger people. This is a very fine line, very fine line, and etc. The threshold. Here's another conference, maybe. The threshold as a category, and it relates to this issue. By the way, I just want to say, Elijah just didn't show up. He could have come. He can go through doors. But he many times he appears as a poor person because God incarnates, if you want to say, in the poor, in the hand of the poor. So, and that's always a question, entry, who's blocked, what is the function? I want to say a lot of gated communities, they're not really about security. I'm not talking about, again, this situation. They are about distance, about accessibility. And we know that part of creating class structures is about how accessible you are or are not accessible you are. Then some friends by now that I have to call them through 3 secretaries. And having their phone is a big sign of greatness. Just direct line. So it's not about security. It's about ways in which accessibility is a form. And we know, by the way, it's a very bad way of leadership. The leadership is based on being inaccessible. It's a false virtual sense of transcendence. But again, another very deep question. Another very deep question. And a kind of a sad comment, to a certain degree, of a community that still has to guard itself. In its own houses of worship, I don't think there is I can go to a church and not being asked for my passport. And I went to Kabbalat Shabbat and I was asked. Here, again, I'm not bemoaning, I'm not, Baruch Hashem, here we are. But it's a moment of reflection. The problem of the threshold, the price of the threshold, and the ways in which sometimes, not all the times, so-called security concerns are there to basically eliminate easy access. They're not about security. They're just about I'm not accessible. I see you, you just don't see me. There's always asymmetry of sight. Yes. Thanks.
Okay, so how do we create this security and accessibility simultaneously? How do you create this house of hospitality? When you have to have a police escort from the big message because there's a Nazi demonstration. Okay, I think we have time for one more question.
Does anyone else? Yes, it's only you.
A follow-up question about the relations between home and perfection. If we accept a description that on the basis level, home is a shelter for security. In a perfect world, you don't need security. On the second level, home is some place that you can hide shame. In a perfect world where everybody can be very free and open, there is no shame. Then the whole concept of home is derived from imperfect world, and it's actually a negative concept. The question is whether home has some positive connotation as well.
Good question. It's a wonderful question. So I will take an issue maybe or wonder whether shame is really a condition of imperfection. And you say, well, in a place where you can be intimate with everyone, you don't need intimacy. In a place where you'll be intimate with everyone, you don't have intimacy. No. It's philosophers will call it positional goods. Right? It's like giving the prize for the best piano performance. Right? If everybody gets the prize, there isn't such a prize. So I think that home is a positional good, by the way, literally speaking. Right? Because intimacy is a privileged relation. It's a privileged relation that wouldn't exist if it was equalized all across. You know, the story is a wonderful story about confession. We are in an age of confession. So there is a story of a guy coming to a priest, a Catholic priest, and says, I want to confess that all my life I was stealing from the elderly, their checks, etc. And he says to him, so why are you coming now? He says, I'm a Jew. So he says, so why are you coming altogether? He says, I'm telling everyone. So there is, I think, part of maybe here the problem of virtual exhibition, the world of equal intimacy, etc. That's exhibitionism. It's not. There won't be intimacy there. So I think and I want to say another thing about love. And home is a space of love. Because I think one of the markers of love is attention, right? The person you really like, let's say your child, you know that his heart is broken because he got 89 in score rather than 91. And that has to do with what his brother got and what his friend, etc. And you comfort. There isn't such a human right to be comforted for an 89 score. Love is a privileged relation in which someone cares that you like your tea with 1.5 teaspoons of sugar, but the half is an attention is a privileged relationship. It cannot be all across the world. There won't be love. An individuation, you might say another maybe point, that any individuation grows out of love by that someone cared about something very specific about you, very specific, very particular. Your sorrows, your likes, your expectations. Like I would say, giving a present. What is a good present? From a real friend, intimate friend. It's a real art to bring someone a good present. It's something that he wouldn't buy, but it's something that he really wants. That takes attention. A gift, a present, it's like you don't come to, it's superfluous, right? You don't come to a dinner bringing as present you brought, I don't know, 1 kilo of tomatoes. It's very bad. It has to be something they're not going to buy any onion that they might, but it's a luxury item that they wish they had. So all that I'm saying is that we have to think about positional goods. Or I would say the home is the home, here's another philosophical take. The home is the space for positional goods. By positional goods I mean goods that if they will be given equally to everyone, everywhere, they're not going to be that type of goods. And that's where actually home is not a response to imperfection, is a way of exhibiting some sort of perfection, intimacy, and love. Home is positional in a deep sense.
Okay, thank you so much for that concluding question and comment on that. And by that, I would like to invite our final speaker for this session. And that is my esteemed colleague, Karin Zetterholm, from University of Lund. Karin Zetterholm is Associate Professor of Jewish Studies. She is a specialist in rabbinic text, and her Jewish interpretations of the Bible still serves very many of our students as their first solid introduction to rabbinic text. So please, Karin.
You want to sit by your business? Or you can
Thank you. It's very difficult to be the last speaker, especially after this lecture and the comments are very limiting. I'm not supposed to move. And this very interesting discussion. So thank you very much for inviting me at the last moment. I really appreciate it. And as for being the last speaker, I'll do my best. When thinking about home in a Jewish context, two things came to mind. The first one is a recent book by Daniel Boyarin called The Traveling Homeland, the Babylonian Talmud as Diaspora, where he argues that the Babylonian Talmud is a portable homeland, by which he means that wherever the Talmud is studied is a home for Jews. He claims that a cultural discourse is created around the study of the Talmud, a culture that is common to all the different places where Jews study and connect them to one another, creating a sense of home in different places all over the world. Learning itself, says Boyarin, constitutes a home, and if Talmud study is the center of the world of the Jew, no other center is needed. That can be disputed, obviously. The other thing is the ancient debate in the two Talmuds between the rabbis in the land of Israel and those in Babylonia, where the rabbis in the land of Israel insist that it's very important to live in a geographical place, namely the land of Israel. Whereas the Babylonian rabbis claim that studying is actually the most important thing. much more important than a geographical place. I'll just read a quote from the Tosefta. The rabbis of the land of Israel. A person should live in Israel, even in a city full of idol worshippers, and not outside of Israel, even in a city of Jews, as the mitzvah of living in the land of Israel is the equivalent of all the mitzvot in the Torah. That's a very strong statement. The Babylonian rabbis responded to this by reinterpreting the biblical, or wherever Jerusalem or Zion appears in the Bible, they reinterpreted it to mean learning. So Zion became yeshiva in Babylonia rather than a geographical place. And this, of course, reflects the competition between the two rabbinic centers in Babylonia and in the land of Israel, as Isaiah Gaffney has written on. There's even, of course, the rabbis in Babylonia, they need to justify why they don't want to make Aliyah, they want to stay in Babylonia. And there's even a passage in the Babylonian Talmud actually prohibiting moving to the land of Israel. That's also a strong statement. And I was thinking, when I was listening to the lecture, about the criteria for home that you mentioned. And I think they all of them work for both the land of Israel and the yeshiva. You mentioned not being on guard. That works for the land of Israel. And it works for the small environment of a yeshiva. And knowing the culture, understanding the people, reading people, that also works for both places. And being relieved of the burden of appearance also works for both places. But if you move into the public space, as we've already discussed, the picture changes. So, Paideia promotes Jewish learning and thus creates a home for Jews in Stockholm and in Europe. Even though the fact that most of the professors and instructors are brought from Israel might be taken as an indication of the view that true learning is only found in the land of Israel. As Isaiah says, in Zion tetzei Torah, from Zion, learning, instruction goes forth, and God's word comes from Jerusalem. And just to end with a very, well, in a way, compared to the previous discussion, trivial thing, but still important. Lund University has recently received money to strengthen Jewish studies, and I'm responsible for this project. And I'm hoping to create an academic center for Jewish studies in Lund in collaboration, I hope, with Paideia and Uppsala University. And in the future also, I hope to involve some of the major universities in Scandinavia. It can never compare with Jerusalem, of course, even though we hope to get some help and collaboration from Israeli scholars too. But hopefully we can create a small Jerusalem, or at least a faint reflection of a Jerusalem. And as a first sign of this revival, I want to finish by mentioning that we have revived the journal Scandinavian Jewish Studies, Nordisk Judaistik, with Ruth Inman in Åbo and myself as editors. So that's one good sign. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Karin. And I could add that one of the great things about that journal is that it's now online and open access. So you can just go to the webpage and read it for free from your own computer at home.
And you're welcome to contribute.
So Karin finishes with the notion of, is a home a physical place, or is it a place where you behave in a certain way? And there's actually an interesting Christian parallel to that. During the time of the Crusades, there were monastics who wanted to be liberated from their vows in order to go on the crusade to Jerusalem. And there were other theologians that said that no, it's not just that you don't need to do that, you shouldn't do that, because you're actually creating Jerusalem through your pious life. So a pious life can create a sacred space. Or maybe that it's not that we find hospitality in a home, it's the hospitality that creates a home also. With that, I would like to conclude this session, and I would like to release you all for the coffee break, but also call your attention to the fact that we start at 3:15, and I would like you to come back here to initiate the Chavruta session after the coffee break. Thank you.